Please sign to verify this is everything you've ever said.
What?
Sign this too.
Oh, this is absurd.
And this.
Marvel Studios LOKI brings star Tom Hiddleston back to the iconic role he's perfected since first appearing on screen as the character in 2011's Thor. Here, in the Disney Plus limited series, an alternate timeline of Loki, or a variant, encounters the TVA, the Time Variance Authority, a mysterious bureaucratic organization empowered with policing timeline variations. As the series traverses multiple timelines and exotic interplanetary locales, director Kate Herron needed to unify her supporting crafts team behind her singular vision for the project. All crafts departments working on the project collaborated tightly with one another to deliver an exquisitely detailed, inventive, and imaginative expansion of both the Loki mythology and the Marvel Cinematic Universe itself. But how did director Kate Herron unify her supporting craft teams? Well, she started with a singular concept: retro-futurism.
As a director, you have an idea of the overall tone and the look of the show and how you want people to emotionally feel, but you're nothing without your team. And I think for me on this, the thing that I loved about it so much was that I really did have like the best team. I think for me, for example, with the technology, retro-futuristic technology in sci-fi, but also in comic books, like we've seen a lot of it. But for me, for example, working in multiple offices, some of the computers I worked on should have been thrown out years ago. You know what I mean? But they were like, well, it's not broken and it still turns on. So until it doesn't turn on anymore, we're not replacing it. So, but that for me felt very real. Or like, if you work in a very bureaucratic situation, being like, oh, well, can I get this thing through, please? And they're like, well, you'll have to go to this department and get this signed. And then you have to wait 2 weeks. And like, I think that was the fun thing with looking at the TVA was like, yeah, that feels very TVA.
So how did that vision translate to the rest of the team? Let's start with production designer Kasra Farahani to find out.
Retrofuturism is interesting because it's, how do you say it? I feel like it's pretty strongly associated with sort of dystopic views of things, like things in which time or society evolved in a slightly different way. And so the lack of familiarity, there's a kind of an uncanny quality with retrofuturism because it's familiar. And so it evokes connection in the audience, sentimentality, nostalgia, and yet it's foreign and different. So it can be unsettling also. And I think that's sort of perfect for the TVA, which is, from a production design standpoint, it was basically like colliding the monolithic, brutal, kind of cold, post-war brutalist version of mid-century modernism with the more American, West Coast American specifically, optimistic, happy, bright colored veneer of mid-century modernism. So that retrofuturistic kind of uncanny valley of familiar and yet oddly strange worked perfectly to blend the autocracy and authoritarianism with the lovely, inviting mid-century finishes and materials. But in terms of the technological background or underpinnings of the TVA, in terms of trying to figure out a logic to consistently apply to the sets and the props and things, sort of arrived in my own mind, at least the way I thought about it, what I thought it was useful to think about was thinking of it as if analog technology had had never gone away, but continued to get more sophisticated
Mm.
and never kind of gave way to digital technology. It's just analog kept getting more and more sophisticated, and then was combined with weird alien and anomalous technology that the TVA had, collected from different timelines and brought in and mixed with this sort of super advanced analog tech. So that was a sort of like guiding logic that I would retreat into when I was trying to solve a design problem in the TVA.
Farahani worked hand in hand with visual effects supervisor Dan Deleeuw to extend this concept of retro-futurism from physical sets to the magic world of VFX.
With something like that, it's working with the production designer and getting their designs, and then trying to incorporate it. So you've got physical devices like the reset charges, right? That are a practical object that you have on set that you can come in and scan and apply the visual effects to. But when you get something like the time doors, this kind of advanced concept, and we've seen the ideas of it, throughout the MCU. It's similar in some ways to what Doctor Strange's, portals are with the sparks, right? But the retro-futurism comes in for Loki. It's not something that's magic. How do you make it feel like it's something that's going to live in that same space that Kate and Kasra, our production designer, came up with? And so in that sense, it was, R&D'ing the look that, it was, the kind of the glass door feel, the time doors that, with scratches on them that had been, feel like they're, even though they're somewhat of a magical projection, they feel like there's something that's grounded as something practical, that if your hand didn't go through it into a different time, you could actually feel it and touch it. And then, like when the rain comes on it, and then the shot outside Roxcart, the rain actually falls on it, and you can see the rain kind of bouncing off the top. So it's carrying, that design and feel over into some of the more fantastic, parts of the story.
So does retro-futurism extend to costume design? Well, of course it does.
It plays out in costuming in the sense that where your vernacular lies and your language. So by the retro aspect being, we found a decade, or a very iconic decade, to pull recognizable imagery from. And then the futurism was, how can we take this language and build upon it and create a futuristic, sort of anachronistic world, but yet a recognizable world, so that it didn't take people fully out of just the human story, which I think really worked with the retro, having a retro reference that is recognizable to the audience. So the language is sort of built in, and it allows all departments to have a common thread, so that you really are world building in a sense of a language that the audience can understand, but adding a twist to it so it is fresh and lets your imagination go a little bit further than just doing something that's period, or just doing something that's futuristic. And I think that it was a nice way to keep the audience still attached to the characters. I think it allowed the audience to have more of an attachment to the characters and not be just completely lost in, what is that? what is that strange collar on that person or whatever. It was, we tried to use recognizable imagery. So let's just start with Mobius, and that TVA sort of a police station detective world that the analog world that they're living in. You instantly think of a suit or a sport jacket and a tie for a detective. So, and really trying to stick to that, Mod Squad sort of detective show era suiting, but then just adding a twist to the recognizable features. So I turned the collar inside out, or I took what we would know as a collar and I just changed it slightly so it was still what we know clothing to have, but I gave it a sort of a futuristic twist. But I also really dug hard for vintage fabrics. So all of those suits in the TVA are made with like a real like 1950s and 60s fabrics. And I think it really helped to not keep it just from looking like Star Trek, right? So it was not just stretch fabrics, it was real fabrics that I feel like are kind of new to the MCU, and just that it was like suiting. It's not stretchy. He's not running around in action ready fabrics, more just detective gear.
Yeah, no
So,
spandex.
No spandex, yes. And I think that Kasra, the production designer, had always had this thing, and Kate, about nothing glowing. Mm-hmm. So maybe we could say that was the same thing with spandex, except for classical. And for the rest, it was just kind of creating, I feel like throughout the TVA and throughout season 1, there was always this undercurrent of rankings of class, of societal structure. And so it was really important to create this structure within the TVA, that there were levels of ranking in the TVA. So it felt right to have the Minutemen that just were all the same, mm-hmm. and kind of created that SWAT team effect. Unfortunately, I don't think anybody ever really saw it, but the Minutemen all had Harlequin patterns, so they all changed where their color. They did like a checkerboard when you put them in a group. They created a checkerboard, which was just sort of a play on time and space and all of that. So that was another thing, was just trying to play on, to kind of put an Escher effect on some of the clothes, mm-hmm. right? By turning collars around and all that sort of stuff.
Finally, how does retro-futurism fit into something as non-visual as the score? We'll turn to composer Natalie Holt to find out how the theremin achieved that effect.
Yeah, so we both had like a mood board for when we read the script, of like ideas that came to us, and like weirdly Kate just was really obsessed with the theremin anyway, and she'd been listening to Clara Rockmore, and I just worked with a theremin player on a project. So yeah, she mentioned the theremin and I mentioned it, and it was like weird. And then also A Clockwork Orange, I just felt like Loki had a similarity with that character, and the aesthetic of the Stanley Kubrick movie just was in my head when I was reading the script. And I mentioned that, and they were like, I remember Kate and Kevin who interviewed me just stopped, because that was one of their references, and it was like I was kind of hitting the references that they already had, so without knowing. But that was right. I think that's what helped me win the job. We also associate the theremin with those like 1950s B movies, and right. They have like almost like a kitsch sound when you hear that. It's sort of definitely and actually in that Miss Minutes kind of instructional video that he watches at the beginning, I used the theremin in much more of a 1950s B movie way. But then throughout the score, I think the theremin becomes more like a voice. So the way I was using it was changing quite a lot as well. Yeah, it started out being retro-futurism and calling back those 1950s B movies. But then the instrument that I was using as a sort of kitsch thing at the beginning became something that was suddenly playing these big melodic lines, like where Mobius is pruned, and that it suddenly takes on a kind of more powerful role. And I just used it more like like how you would use a voice, I can't say any other way. But whereas like beginning in the sort of more 1950s style way of using the theremin, it's used more like an effect.
Not long now. Do you think that what makes a Loki is the fact that we're destined to lose?
No. We may lose. Sometimes painfully. But we don't die. We survive.
Over the course of Loki, Loki and the variant Sylvie break away from the TVA and travel to exotic locations across the universe and across time, including Crashing Moon Lamentis 1 and the epic Void at the End of Time.
The Lamentis episode was really hard because alien cultures and alien cities have been done so many times, and even in the MCU have been done so many times, and they've been done really successfully so many times. So to try to find a new vernacular for that was challenging. So that's how we arrived at in the city of Sharu. There are all the buildings are painted with these really elaborate sort of op art-esque patterns, and we did that in a combination of conventional paint and blacklight reactive paint. And we installed a series of blacklights all around the set, so that when you look at the buildings, it appears almost like the blacklight reactive bands of color are sort of floating off the rest of the building. It sort of looks like in-camera holograms to a degree. So that was one way we found to sort of differentiate our alien city from another one. But yeah, I'd say that was the trickiest thing because there's a lot of precedent for that, and it was very important that in such a unique and I think kind of different show for the MCU that all of the environments meet that standard, including the Lamentis, the alien world of Lamentis. So yeah, the Citadel was, I'd say there were a few major influences. The first and biggest is that there is the Citadel, there is a depiction of the Citadel in the comics. And it is a castle, fortress-looking structure on an asteroid. So that's where we took that idea, rather the script took that idea from the comics, and then we riffed off the script. What I wanted to do with that was that the Citadel not be a piece of architecture that was erected on top of the asteroid, but rather that it was a piece of architecture that was hewn actually from the asteroid, like Petra in Jordan or something, where there's all sorts of beautiful ornate or architectural detail and moldings and ornamenture, but it's not things that were fabricated elsewhere and then brought and installed. They were actually carved in situ right there. And then the idea that Kate brought to it was wanting to evoke the feeling of Xanadu, which is the Hearst Castle-esque piece of architecture in Citizen Kane, where there's this lonely figure rattling around this big house. So those were the kind of three driving influences of the Citadel at the End of Time.
VFX supervisor Dan Deleeuw pulled from multiple visual inspirations to fully realize Lamentis 1, The Void at the End of Time, and the Citadel.
I think particularly with something like Loki, it was an interesting show because it was so many different environments per episode, and you need to go in and then kind of break those down and understand them, and kind of go into it thinking about, especially in this case, with working with Kate Herron, the director, she wanted a very distinct image or feel of each of the different places that you went through in the season, and it was very much a progression of style and color and even from a story standpoint, the drama. And so you're really looking at the story and the director's vision to help guide you and helping to realize those effects. Well, with Lamentis One, it was we shot in Atlanta, and so everything you see of any live action you see with Loki and Sylvie walking around on Lamentis, it's basically it's on the back lot of the studio out in Atlanta, and it's it's essentially just dirt on the ground. They brought in sand and laid it all out, and so what you get is that not a lot of big footprint in terms of where you can kind of stage your action in, right? So it's all the walk and talks were as they're walking across Lamentis One, and they had about 40 feet before they got to the end of it, and then had to like turn around and go back to the end of the dirt, and then kind of walk forward again. So we kept expanding and making it feel as though they were like on one long path working their way through the desert. And so it was a combination of the digital set extensions for that. We did shoot in a quarry as well for when the meteorite started hitting. So that was something that was could be mostly done practically, but again, getting into what Kate liked about making some locations more exotic, and the idea that every bit of the show has this story, so that if you look at the back of the quarry, it could have just been the wall that we shot, but we ended up putting sections that are purple. So the idea is that there's a purple ore that they've been mining on those planets, and that's why or the moon. And that's why the planet above was breaking apart, because they overmined it and mined all this purple ore. And so we ended up putting some of that purple ore in the walls of the quarry. So it kind of tied the planet and the moon together. And then so you had that with digital meteorites, map paintings on the wall of the crater. And then while they're walking across Lamentis, it's all set extensions out from the dirt they actually had to walk on, and then some of the wider shots you get more of the bigger full CG shots with the train, and then telling the story of as the planet's breaking apart, having meteorites come down and larger chunks of the meteorites hitting the planet. And that was one of the bigger choices, where it was the idea of that the moon is that the purple, it's still got kind of that purple ore feel to it, and then the moon was a little bit green because they mined it all away. So then you had the contrast of the green with the purple, and we had to go in and kind of understand. We did a pass at understanding what it would look like if we shot, we shoot it obviously on Earth because that's where we're at, but the blue sky of Earth and the color of light on Earth, and then seeing what we would do to, as convincingly as possible, imply that there's more of a magenta haze in the atmosphere on the moon, and trying to reconcile that and see how we could color correct it and still get the feel that Kate liked, and then still then have the kind of the bold green choice of the planet above. So it's a balancing act to try to keep a balancing act of stylistic choices, and then trying to keep it realistic looking. Well, in terms of shooting it, it was all shot on stage, and they had they had built the train and put grass on it, and so that became the kind of the hero, part of a hero kind of tile set. That so when ILM came in and we scanned it, and they built it, so we always had that stage that they were on, right, and it was like reused for when they were outside the hut when Loki and Sylvie were talking. We reused it when they were kind of running across the terrain, when they're standing on the edge of the cliff. So it's all basically the same set, just shot from different angles. So when we went then to go use it in the digital environment, that set was always the center of that digital environment, except that it was picked up and set into the middle of the rocky terrain or the hilly terrain, and that was picked up out of that and put into the flat terrain. So you always had that one key set in the middle, and then did the set extensions out from there. From that point, it was something that was kind of Kate based it on, it's hilarious, she based it on the kind of the moors, in Scotland, and then she was like, well, kind of like the Lake District, so Kate's from the UK, so it was all, kind of overcast London was kind of the design aesthetic, but it was so starting with that, and then then with Goliath and kind of his part of it, it was the he was a character that was mostly made from clouds, was effect sim, with cloud renders on it, but it was something that there was a skeleton underneath it. It was something that you could animate it in a way, and then kind of based on how you moved it, and then the geometry that was on top of the skeleton, that you could then kind of grow the clouds off of that. So we, in the kind of final battle with Loki and Sylvie, we basically had that rectangular area of set that we used, and then we would just kind of, based on where Goliath was and how Goliath was attacking, we did a very quick pass. We did a pass in previs from the third floor to kind of orient the actors in that block of ground relative to where we wanted Goliath. So there's the tight shots that are just with Tom and Sophia that are just not just, but the set extensions that are much more traditional. But then when like the bigger shots, we would either use the set, or we would, if we got farther away, then we would move into digi doubles, where they would run across the terrain, and it was just kind of almost reverse engineering in a way, because you're with them on set, it was always the smoke monsters out there, just kind of on the blue screen somewhere, and it was kind of going through the process and post production, kind of making all those pieces work, because you could only run 40 feet before you're off the set. So everything was like, all the tight shots, all the shorter runs with Tom, would then just, we would build into that environment and place that set wherever we needed it to be. So if they started at one end of the valley, it would be placed, within the digital set on that end, and we just kind of keep moving the set further and further along to where they got to where they needed to be with where classic Loki's recreating Asgard. But I mean, the entire sequence is this, between episode 5 and 6, it was, in episode 5, it was almost like a mini feature, right? It was a finale. Like in any other movie, it'd be like a finale in a feature where you're going through with the, not only the digital terrain you had, when things are pruned, they're dropped into the void. So then we had the battleship, the Eldridge, for the Philadelphia experiment. We dropped that into the void. So again, that was one of the ones that they went through and found all the reference photos for and reproduced it as best we could, except for the number on the ships, because we made it bigger so people could see it if they wanted to look it up online and see what we were reproducing. But even then, it was like a partial set that they built and had sailors on it that flee from Goliath, and so then it was when Goliath touches them, basically he eats the temporal energy out of them. So then they as so we do a transition from a real actor to a digi version of them that with clothes, with cloth and skin, that then ages away to the skeleton underneath, and that's just like 2 or 3 shots, right? That's like, again, that's be a big effect in our show. It was like, okay, let's do 2 or 3 shots to tell that story, and the ship, launching the cannons into Goliath, and so then you get to the end with Asgard and classic Loki and Goliath attacking that, and wherever he's touching it, he's aging the city and making it disappear, and then so if that wasn't enough, then we were in a meeting, and everybody's kind of like, well, this is the place we want to do the Easter eggs. So then, in addition to the terrain and the Goliath and the battleship, and then so now we went into the archives and we got like helicarriers and the Dark Aster from Guardians of the Galaxy, and new Easter eggs with the Living Tribunal, and it was just like it was an astounding amount of work for episode 5 of the 6.
Can I see your tickets?
You again? Hello. Tickets. Yes, of course. Here they are. Oops. Still, it looks lovely, doesn't it? Look, is this really necessary? There is a simple explanation. Hey.
Huh? What? Hey! Get out of the way!
Cinematographer Autumn Dural Arkapaw created a brilliant, seemingly single-take set on Lamentus 1. Here, she talks about setting up that incredible sequence and the visuals for the Void's Citadel.
It's fun to talk about because it was when I signed on to the project, and as I said, the interview with Kate, it was a hit for both parties. We started talking about that sequence right on. I did some prep at Disney before we all moved to Atlanta, and it was one of the first things that kind of, because there's obviously this stuff where there's talking and we start out in the pilot, we kind of had a sense of what that was, but it was like on the page, maybe like 3/8 of a page, this sequence that kind of alluded to like a Children of Men, John Wick-esque kind of energetic scene where they're trying to make it to the Ark. And, that's what was on the page. So we really had kind of the time to develop that and come up with anything that we wanted to, as far as like, what does the set look like? What is, point A to point B, and how do they get to the Ark? And so right off the bat, in our prep, we started talking about what that looked like. And at first we had kind of them jumping on a motorcycle, and Kasra built us, because she was very interested in it being humanistic and feeling like you're with them, and not something that was overly kind of forced on the audience, but something the audience could feel like they were with them. But then also like it did have the effects elements. Obviously there's a lot of explosions and stuff, which we did practically, and accentuated with VFX. But again, trying to do as much in camera on that day. We shot over 5 nights, and a lot of logistical stuff went into that since we had our pandemic break. And like I said, we worked on that from the beginning. We did a lot of 3D visualizations of that. And then pandemic break, we had prep, to talk more about it. And then obviously came back from that and shot it over 5 nights. Took like 4 weeks to rig, hundreds of practicals and fixtures built into the set so that, they're able to dim, and we chose colors, and there's blacklight paint on the buildings. So it was very, very extensive and a big collaboration with all departments. And I think the execution was wonderful. We would do run-throughs and prep on weekends to see how camera would move and choose a lens and stuff. So I think I'm just very proud of that, because you have all your resources. You're working for Marvel, you have great support. We had such an amazing team, and to be able to pull something like that off and do a lot of practical elements in it, and the actors were brilliant, moving through the space, and Tom's such a great runner, and he's just so game for anything. So it was really cool to see the result. Kasra came up with this design, and in him and Kate's meetings, like the castle is built out of the stone that you find on the planet, or where you are up in the sky. So it's this like black marble kind of inlaid with gold, and just kind of treatment. If you walk on a set like this with, say, all the house lights on, you can really see kind of the detail that it took to kind of make this look real. It was beautiful. So that was really fun for me, because we came up with kind of this aurora borealis kind of lighting thing, where you have a timeline, and colors are kind of shifting in and out, and you see that within the space. So it's like, again, having lighting that's a character in the film, as well. And movement, is really important. And I love that. So the light's always moving in that space. And, it's very, very dark space, which I love because I do a lot of kind of negative fill all the time. And I like to create contrast. So when you're already starting with a dark space, any light you put into it is going to accentuate, whatever is falling under it. So it was really nice to play with that with Jonathan because he has such a dramatic sequence there in monologue. And, we did some kind of very, energetic and camera moves that kind of started to, as he gets a little bit louder and starts talking to them and engaging them, you feel that tension. So no, it was really, I think seeing, Tom and Sophia kind of come together as a team at the end and face off with Jonathan, who's a brilliant actor as well. It was a really great sequence, and it's giving the audience a lot because it's kind of, the audience is, waiting to see what he's revealing, and all this whole journey has taken them there. So I feel like the design of the space and what we came up for lighting was very emotional and dramatic. And I really enjoyed that sequence. It was and the missed minutes obviously is incorporated into that. And another kind of, like I said, lighting element that's a character. And, we had something there practically giving that effect. And VFX obviously accentuated that when they put her in at the end. But as much as we could have on the set, these effects, we would put there in the space for them to play off of.
Let's head back to costume designer Christine Wada to talk about those otherworldly designs, including one for classic Loki.
That was so fun. Well, so there were obviously like the burly Loki and the kid Loki, which are kind of a little bit like they're from the comic books, right? Like Kid Loki, and pretty specific to that. But then we started to get into what could the variant Lokis, where could they have been found in time, or what did they have that might have been lost in history? Mm-hmm. So, like I think it was Prisoner Loki. Like I had him have a Fabergé egg, as because there are many missing. There are several missing Fabergé eggs. So he had a Fabergé egg weapon, and I tried to find Bicycle Loki. Just tried to find, say, a bandit Loki was in the junkyard, and he had to make his horns out of bicycle, handlebars. Or we just tried to think of places that Lokis might have been hiding out, and what did they scavenge from those places that they were hiding out, like a license plate. And they had to make all their armor and their weapons out of license plates, or just giving them the backstory of where did they come from, where were they hiding out, where were they? Kind of your eccentric villain. It was always an approach to do a more eccentric villain that was so powerful that he didn't need to be armored, and he didn't need to put on a lot of very overly designed. That I wanted him to have a little casual element to him. So I actually sent Jonathan Majors like an old kimono from the 30s that I had him wear, and see if he could if he was comfortable moving in that. And then we just sort of built from there. And he really, it was magical to see how much he had rehearsed in that coat and actually really knew how to use that costume. But on a, I know that that's a side note to the designing of the costume. There was also, I spent a long time on the embroidery that goes around the edge of the sort of the skirt of that robe. And it is just one continuous line to make that whole pattern. So we actually just to feel like almost like a Mobius strip. It just never, the sort of time just circling back on itself, and the lines of that embroidery just circling back and back and back, and kind of never having a beginning or an end. So that once again was really trying to bring in the differences in classes. So was trying to find a silhouette for the miners that was very oddly with face coverings, almost like migrant farm workers, when you sometimes see them all like covered up, or actual real miners. And from the very beginning, we always knew we wanted to have purple dust on those people. So we created like this purple dust to put all over the costumes and give them this sort of children of men, a unity where nobody really stood out. But oddly, then we had COVID. So those face cut, we shot that right after coming back from lockdown. So it was kind of a miracle that it was designed into the costumes to have their faces covered. And then to really have impractical fabric and silhouettes for the upper class. So pretty much and I really kind of tried to make them seem towering, tall presence, and just really impractical fabrics that were sheer and layered and not practical to a dirty environment, light and color. Just yeah, that's momentous. Oh wait, and the guards, which had those that I wanted to play on sort of a modern take of chainmail. So all of those guard uniforms were actually knit like you would knit a fly knit shoe. So so we took that technology and we knit all those costumes for those. Yeah, it's pretty amazing, actually.
Finally, no matter the location, Natalie Holt's score ties the series together seamlessly, including Loki's theme.
It was a kind of piecing a jigsaw puzzle together, because there were so many different elements to it. But it very much started out with finding the Loki theme, and just doing something really kind of epic and grand that seemed to suit Loki, and then just like finding those weird, the sound palettes of the kind of electronics and synthesizers, and the theremin, which played a big part, and then having some flourishes from Wagner, which felt appropriate for Loki and his kind of over-the-top theatrical nature.
Right.
And then so it started with his theme, and then I did a suite, which is a sort of Marvel way of working. And so that suite kind of set out the temp poles for the rest of the score, if that makes any sense. It's like all the character themes. Just wanting to do something that had lots of references. Like there wasn't one particular thing. It was like the story and the nature of the story through multiple, time travel, and each episode seemed to have its own character. Like Lamentus almost felt more like going into a cowboy movie or something. Like so it was just wanting to pull things together and have something cohesive, but which had lots of elements to play around with, to be expressive with, like the use of clocks and time ticking, and the use of like I would run things through an analog tape machine to make them sound slightly faded and to give them a more retro sound. And then there's the, like referencing classical music. Like I wanted Loki's theme to touch on Wagner, so that people were kind of feeling a callback to this grand classical tradition that we have as well. And it's, in episode 6, where you go into the Citadel and you travel through time, we were just like, it's like the, that golden record that we sent off into space. Like it's sort of giving, when you listen to the golden record, there's like pieces from tribal music to Bach to Mozart to, you know, electronic. Milton Babbitt, I think, is on there. It's like, that's what I kind of, the golden record is an inspiration for me as well in the score, because it's the whole of time.
Mhm.
His theme remained fairly consistent through the series, but when we came to episode 5, and there's Richard E. Grant is a form of Loki, like old classic Loki, who's called.
Right.
And we watched it through, and there's this huge sequence where he's, you know, the monster, he creates this vision of Asgard to fool the monster. And it's like a big set piece. And it just had some, I can't remember what was on it, some temp that just motored through, and it was just a very long sequence, which can be intimidating as a composer. Like, oh great, I've got to write a 6-minute long enormous piece of music that ties this crazy amount of stuff all together. But I just was like, I think I'm going to try to actually go more with the Wagner here and do like a version of Ride of the Valkyries, just because this is, we've been hearing Wagner in the Loki theme all along, and he's like the most classic version of Loki. So maybe we can just go full Wagner, just really classical with this fight sequence. And so yeah, that's kind of where that inspiration came from for that. So yeah, I went full Wagner there. The score, like, so I was using traditional Norwegian folk instruments to to connect with Loki's family and his past and his mother. So that was kind of a very deliberate decision. And then there was something, Mobius is obviously, he's a variant, and he is obsessed with the 90s. He's got all these 90s ski magazines. And so Mobius's theme, I was like, oh, what would he listen to if he was obsessed with the 90s? Like maybe it would be Bon Jovi. And then I kind of took this, I took this kind of guitar riff for his theme. So that connected with that. And then sometimes, like, there were things like DB Cooper was a kind of 1950s sequence where he jumps off a plane, and I tried a sort of samba version of the Loki theme. So there were lots of moments where I was taking the theme and there's like a prog rock version of the Loki theme where they're having a fight in the Loki palace. So yeah, there was lots of kind of opportunities to play around with different settings of the theme and trying, like, in episode 6, where He Who Remains was talking about his life, I tried to do a Mozart requiem with in the background of what he was saying. So yeah, there's lots of kind of playing around with time in the score, I think, and pulling on different things that remind you of something to kind of help tell the story.